on such a cold night. We have here Sheila Mosley, who's going to be speaking first about the political situation in Syria, and then there'll be questions to her. And we have Henry McLaughlin from Campaign Against the Arms Trade, and we'll have questions then. And then we'll have a general discussion, because there may well be a lot of knowledge that you have in this audience that will contribute to it.
I was talking down here about 2 years ago. I was invited to the Secular Society to talk about Syria just before everything kicked off. So it's sad that we have to be still down here talking about it. And first of all, if I can give a welcome to our two friends who are from Syria, very, very recently in England, and their use of English is very limited, so probably they don't understand, but if we can welcome them. Thank you for coming. Okay, what I want to do is just give you a little bit of an idea about what's happening right now and a bit of the history, and it's very useful to have this map. And it's a horrible, confusing situation, so at the end of it you might just feel, oh, what are we going to do? And that is where everybody is at the minute, I think. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is a well-respected organisation collecting information about what's happening, yesterday 150 plus people in Syria died. 41 were unarmed civilians, 45 were rebels, 15 were unidentified and foreign rebels, 42 were regular soldiers, and 2 were defected soldiers. And they died by shelling and clashes, they're called clashes, and gunshots. A lot of my interest in the last 6 years has been about the situation for Kurds in Syria, because traditionally the Kurds have had a really bad time with the Syrian regime. They've been imprisoned, political parties were banned, there was a culture of fear amongst the Kurdish people. They weren't allowed to give Kurdish names to their children. 400,000 had no citizenship. It was just a terrible situation. And then when everybody else started to rebel as well, then we started taking an interest in the whole of Syria. But just to give you an idea about the Kurds, in Aleppo there's an area called Sheikh Maqsoud. And in Sheikh Maqsoud, which is a very Kurdish area, the Kurds are, it's just an epitome of what's happening to the Kurds. The regime is fighting the Kurds there. The Free Syrian Army are very angry about the Kurds because they've not joined with the Free Syrian Army, and I'll explain about that in a minute. And international jihadists are in there as well, and there are Kurdish fighters. It's a real mess in just that small area. UNHCR have today said that there are 4 million internally displaced people in Syria. That's people still inside Syria because of what's happened, and they've run out of cash, and that cash was paying for water, so very basic essentials. There's a lot of need for people inside Syria to be given aid. And of course outside we've got refugees in Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, and people are beginning to find their way to the UK, but we need to understand that not many people will make it to the UK. Most people, when there's a war, end up in the country next to the one that they've just left, so a lot of them will be in the area around Syria. Okay, this is my view, okay? You ask different people, they'll have different views of what's going on. This is my view. A quick flip through the politics of what's going on here. This is Syria here. There's a little bit by the sea, but the other bits border on other areas in the region. In my view, Syria is a battleground for a lot of different countries who are fighting their wars. So we've got Russia and America, who've gone back into a Cold War position. Russia wants this land because strategically it's important, and so does America. There is some oil in there, but I think that's a minor issue. It's more about where it is. So for America, if they can take that, they're so much nearer to Iran, which is the goal that they're after. And for Russia, if they take this area, there's a buffer between their side and what's happening over here. So they haven't come to agreements because Russia doesn't want to agree to anything America says, and America doesn't want to agree to anything Russia says. So in the Western press, we'll hear a lot about how awful Russia is, but actually, I would say they're both to blame for that. In terms of the Kurdish situation, this is Turkey, and the Kurdish area is around here. So when the Brits went in after the First World War, we helped to divide the area, and we thought, right, okay, this region that's inhabited by Kurds, we can cut it up. So bits in Syria, bits in Turkey, bits in Iraq, and bits in Iran. And the Turks, you probably understand, the Turkish situation is quite dire at the moment. There's been a lot of fighting between the Kurds and the Turkish government. There looks as if there might be a peace coming there. But Turkey doesn't want the Kurds in Syria, who live in this area, to get any independence, because then its own Kurdish population is going to rise up. And that's the last thing it wants. So Turkey is trying to stop the Kurdish people finding a solution for what's going on in their area. We've also got Lebanon, which is Sunni, Shia Muslim. Iran is Shia as well. And Bashar al-Assad's group is Alawi, which is, it's not, my understanding, it's not Shia, but it's similar to Shia. They have a sympathy together. So we've got a block here of countries that are of one part of the Muslim faith. And then you've got Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, who are Sunni, and they would really like there to be a Sunni Muslim government here. Because at the moment it has been a secular government. Bashar al-Assad was one of 10% of the population, and if he had a religious government there, it wouldn't have survived. So he had a secular government, which would also appeal to the Kurds, the Christians, the Druze, the other people who were in that country. But the Shia and the Sunni would rather like to have it for themselves. So there's a battle going on to try and break that alliance between those three by making this into a Sunni Muslim country. And the majority of people who live in Syria are actually Sunni Muslim, but there are different groups within that. As you'll know, there's Muslim Brotherhood, there are different levels of Sunni Muslim, and they're beginning to fight each other a little bit. So you can see how it's already beginning to be very complicated. Iran's already managed to change things in Iraq to a large extent, so that there are lots of Shia fighters in Iraq who are coming to Syria to help the government and the fighting there as well. Within Syria, we've got Shia, Sunni, Kurds, Alawi, Druze, Christians. There are quite a lot of Christians here, but there are also quite a lot of Palestinians who are refugees, who are in Golan, from the Golan Heights. There are people who were fleeing from Iraq into Syria as well. It's a very, very mixed population, and they managed to get on pretty well, most of them, for quite a long period of time. But at the moment, that's all becoming very sectarian. So I know people who are Sunni and Shia and Alawi, Christian and Kurds in Syria. The Shia people are having a problem. One of my Shia friends, people in her family have been murdered just because they are Shia. And that's to some extent being fueled by different countries intervening in the area. There are lots of weapons coming in through Turkey, and those are provided by Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and Qatar. And some of them are coming in through the refugee camps up there. Some of these countries have got lots of money, so you can imagine they can afford to put their 2 pennies in there. We've got the EU, which is allying itself with obviously the Western position in America. We've got the Arab League. Different countries belong to the Arab League. Syria is in a difficult position there because they are obviously Arabs as well. And the Arab League has been trying to forge an alliance with the UN and their leader at the moment, Lakhdar Brahimi. Just something we found out the other day is Qatar. One of the interests that Qatar might have is that they've got a lot of gas, which they would like to get into Europe. And if Qatar could get some control in Syria, actually that could find its way up into Europe, and that might benefit them as well. So there's a lot of different fights going on there. Any questions so far? It's a mess, isn't it? It's a real mess. And one of my views is that if all of those different countries from outside of Syria stopped fighting each other and just thought about what the Syrians needed, it would be sorted. But at the moment, because they're fighting and they're providing weapons to their own groups of people, there's a lot of weapons in Syria. I was saying, I saw a tweet today which said that the Free Syrian Army is going to be supplying America with some weapons to fight North Korea with. And that, I think, is just around how many weapons there are. I mean, that's seen as a joke, but it's because there are so many weapons inside Syria at the moment, because they're being provided by different organisations. And within that, people, for example, Saudi Arabia would make sure that there were weapons, but the best weapons would go to the people who would represent them should they get power in Syria. So some organisations have got much better weapons than others. That's a mess. Inside Syria, the whole, it took off in March 2 years ago, and it seems to have arisen. I think they were primed because of the Arab Spring that was going on all over the place. And we have a friend from Dara today, but what happened in Dara was that people started protesting because the children had been arrested there and were imprisoned. And the protests for the first 6 months were peaceful. People were going in the streets, they got bottles of water and flowers for the soldiers, they were holding bread in the air, they were holding olive branches. They were getting shot, and there were maybe 20 a day or something like that in the beginning. And then after 6 months, everything escalated. And now it's, I keep a tally on our website, and it's 150, 200 a day. It's a lot of people who've died there. And it's not likely to finish. As you can see, it's such a mess, it's not likely to finish. And putting more weapons in there is unlikely to be helpful, in my view. I'll just talk briefly about some of the plans that are around for trying to find a solution. Obviously, it does depend on the international community. And Lakhdar Brahimi, who is the UN envoy, UN and Arabic envoy, he will say that there's a 6-point plan, and if people wanted to apply it, then it would be a solution. And that would be about everyone having a commitment to stopping the violence, everyone, the regime, but also the other people that are in there, to commit to work with the envoy to find a peaceful process that would be based on what people inside Syria want. That's very, very important. To provide humanitarian assistance to all of the areas. At the moment, it's very hard to get assistance into Syria, and certainly into certain areas that are run by the rebels, because the Syrian government's got quite a lot of power over there. To release arbitrarily detained people. What was happening in the early days was if you took the number of people who died, at the moment, I think 60,000, and multiplied it by 10, that's probably how many people were currently in detention. Yes.
You say detention by the regime?
By the regime. Yeah. They were filling schools with them, stadiums with them, run out of places in prisons. And what they took out in the first place, as you can imagine in a war, what do you want to get rid of? You want to get rid of the peaceful activists who are going to be helping people to come to an understanding that actually there's a better way forward rather than the extremists. So they took out the peaceful organisers, the people who were being very active. And that polarises everybody. It's happened in lots of wars, and a lot of them have died. Just on that point, I was at a meeting at the House of Lords with Eric Avery, and he said that he understands that America, in its programme of torture, took advice from Syria about how to do it, because they are excellent at torture. And there have been some really awfully recorded deaths. There was a little boy in the early days who was in prison for a couple of weeks, and when his body was given back to his family, which is a warning, look what we're going to do to your kids if you stop to keep on messing about with us. He'd just been so brutally injured. He was a singer, and his voice box was cut out. It's really, really horrible stuff. And the last point of Lakhdar Brahimi's 6-point plan will be respect for freedom of association and peaceful demonstrations. So there are plans around if people want to work to them. We've got inside Syria, there's the Free Syrian Army, which is not an army, it's different groups of people. Some people have been in the Syrian army and they've defected. Some people are organised in little groups. Some people are people who might have worked on the fields, who are angry and they want to take up weapons and they will fight. So lots of different people. There's another group of people that seems to be increasing, and that's the international jihadists, and some of those are coming from England. People who don't belong to Syria, who might have been to fight in Libya, they might have been to fight in Egypt, and their goal is to bring their brand of Islam into the world. And there are an increasing number of them in there. And they're the people that are doing the bombing and the suicide bombings. People who were from Syria originally weren't into suicide bombings, but this is the international jihadists that are bringing this in. And on that point, Turkey is allowing a lot of them to come in so that they can mess about with what's happening with the Kurds and take away any Kurdish power. So they're being used by other countries, but I don't think they need to be used very much because they're very, very organised. They're going all over the world at the moment. There are a group of people, quite a big group of people, who want a peaceful solution. And if you go on Facebook, there are quite a lot of groups on there who are asking for a peaceful solution. Stop the weapons coming in, stop the war, it's not our solution. Within Syria and outside, there's a group called the National Coalition for, the National Coordination Body for Democratic Change, who I have a lot of contact with. They've worked tirelessly for the last, they started in July, so 18 months, nearly 2 years, talking to Russia, talking to China, talking to America, going all over Europe, trying to find ways to bring people together, to bring them to the table, to get this agreement started. But they don't get press because it's not sexy as people with weapons and guns. The British government knows they're there, and the British government's not using them, promoting them as a way forward. In fact, the British government is signing up with the Free Syrian Army and sending in weapons and trying to change Europe's way of dealing with things so that everybody sends weapons into Syria because that's the way it feels that it wants to move forward. And I would say that's because they're hopeful that if that works, they will have a foot in the door in the new Syria. And that's what it's all about. But they are flogging something that's really not working at the moment, and they're flailing in that. They're still ignoring the people looking for a non-violent solution. There's something called the Damascus Civil Alliance, which is a group of these people who've come together to work across the borders of their disagreements, but to try and form a coalition around finding a non-violent solution. But there are quite a few websites, as I say, if you want to find them. So that's just a very brief overview, very glum, I'm afraid, overview. But I think it's useful for people to know that there are people working for non-violence in Syria, and those are the people that I would hope that we would work together with. In terms of aid for people who are in Syria and people outside, there are loads of different organisations, and just while I've got the floor, if I can say, the Syrian Medical Committee is linked to the National Coordination Body, and I know the people who run that organisation, and I would trust them. So if there are different organisations, I'm not saying just give money to the Syrian Medical Committee, but if you want to give any money to it, I have a little purse that somebody gave me, so if you can put some money in there, that would be great. As I say, there are international groups at the Red Cross collecting money as well. So, any question? What's happened with the Kurds on this bit? They're up here, Aleppo, some areas in Aleppo. What happened with the Kurds was that the Kurds said the Free Syrian Army is supported by Turkey, and Turkey had said at some of its meetings to, for example, the National Coordination Body, you're welcome to come to meetings in our country, but get rid of the Kurds out of your organisation. Turkey wasn't looking to help Kurds at all. And so the Free Syrian Army wasn't seen as being an organisation that was building up, the coalition wasn't building up to try, the Syrian coalition, to try and make sure that Kurds got their rights as well. And so the Kurds didn't feel able to engage with them, nor did they engage with the regime. They've had lots of demonstrations. And instead, in this area, which is the area where a lot of Kurds live, they've managed to make an area that's relatively stable because the regime's decided to leave them alone and go and fight elsewhere. Now, part of that, I think, is for the regime to make people think the Kurds are in league with Bashar al-Assad, which they're not. But it has given them a chance to form a council. They've got councils, they've got Kurdish schools for the first time. They celebrate New Year on the 21st of March. And in 2008 and 2010, they were shot in the street for doing that. But this year and last year, the regime was saying, you can celebrate, because they're trying to divide people up. But it is the first time that Kurds have had a chance to have some independence, and they're very much enjoying it, and I hope that's going to stay that way. Some people are worried that the country might divide, so you get Kurdish along there, you get maybe an Alawi section down here where Bashar al-Assad's people tend to be, that the Shia and Sunni might divide as well, and the whole country might divide. And there are lots of people, including Kurds, who don't want the country to split up at all, but they want to live in peace with each other. But the demonstration for what's happened in places like Iraq is that smaller groups get driven out. I'll let you one meeting in the House of Lords about Christians in Iraq, and there were loads before the war started over there, and there's very, very few now because they get driven out. So we would say Syria was a country of massive diversity, and if that could be preserved, that would be wonderful. But it seems it is. Yeah, Christians in Syria were quite useful to Bashar al-Assad before because they were a minority group and so was he. And my understanding is that they were quite advantaged under the old system because then you've got his allies. And so when things started to kick off, people were quite angry with the Christians because they would say that they were Assad's friends. But there are lots of Christians who are sitting on the fence at the moment. They don't feel comfortable with what might come in its place. The Muslim Brotherhood government won't look after Christians, so they don't want that. They're not comfortable with that. They're not comfortable with the regime. They're sitting tight and hoping something's going to come of it.
Yes, I wondered whether a large proportion of the refugees are Christian, because both in Iran and Iraq, as you just said, that in Iraq Christians started had to leave Iraq, and they have in Iran. So.
My understanding about some Christians is because they had money, they could afford to leave the country and go and live somewhere else. So they won't be in refugee camps, a lot of them, I don't think. There are still a lot of Christians there, especially in Damascus. Damascus is just now coming under fire, but it's been fairly settled until recently. And I know in the Kurdish area there are quite a lot of Christians, and the Kurds are saying to anyone, you're welcome into the area as long as you put away your weapons and your uniforms, and there are quite a lot of Christians there as well, working together. So there are alliances building up. A lot of the refugees are people who lived in these areas that are getting bombed now. Wherever the Free Syrian Army goes, Assad follows with his guns and he's got helicopters and shelling the areas, and people are leaving those areas because they can't survive there anymore. You probably see some of the pictures on the telly. Some areas have been completely decimated. His dad, Hafez, was more brutal in terms of the way he dealt with people in his prisons than Bashar al-Assad is. And Bashar al-Assad, his mission in life was to be married to this beautiful woman who actually has British citizenship, but originally was from Syria. And to become an eye doctor. So he was registered, no he wasn't registered, he was attending the Royal Ophthalmologist, isn't it, eye doctors, college in London. But he didn't finish his training. When his dad died, his brother was supposed to take over, but his brother was killed in a car crash. So he was suddenly taken from being a student to being whipped into power. And because he'd had that Western contact, everyone was hopeful that he might bring a different approach. And for the first couple of years, people were hopeful, but actually those changes didn't come. I wouldn't say he's more brutal than his father, because his father was pretty awful. But he didn't make the changes everybody hoped. But also, I mean, the 4 years before this started up that I was involved, we were finding that Bashar al-Assad's doors were being opened to the international community, to trading. France started the Union of the Mediterranean, involved Syria, and Bashar al-Assad became Teflon man. He was doing all these horrible things to the Kurds, and everyone was saying, well, come and join us, it's okay, we'll do a deal with you. Europe made an agreement with Bashar al-Assad, and their view was, if we have an agreement with him, then we've got a foot in the door and we've got some leverage. Assad said he wasn't going to sign the agreement once it was made. He was testing the waters, really. So all these doors were open to him, and you can't be surprised that he thinks he's going to get away with everything, because actually Europe allowed him to get away with things for quite a long time, which is very sad. In terms of strategy, Iran needs a route to the sea. So for Iran, if that top northern bit is available to the Alawis and not in conflict, they can still move in and out. So that's a strategic corridor for them. Damascus obviously is a hub. There are quite a lot of places that's just desert. I don't know if you saw, what do they call those people who drive cars? Top Gear. They did a thing about going on the route of Christianity at Christmas a couple of years ago, and they were driving through the desert in their car. There's a lot of desert in Syria. And there are lots of areas that are very poor. Dara actually is an area where a lot of poor people were as well. People who perhaps didn't have a lot of education, who were working on the land. And some Sunnis were badly treated by the government as well. They weren't advantaged, and they were restless about that. I think think without the Arab Spring, this probably wouldn't have happened. It wasn't on paper, it wasn't in the cards. I also saw a rather worrying message that had been put out before this arose in Syria, where people were deciding what date their revolution was going to start, so it looked like it was organised. So Bashar al-Assad at the beginning was saying that these were all foreign invaders, they were all fighting him because they're coming from other countries, they've all got an international agenda, but they didn't, not at that time. Now, yes, you've got international jihadists in there, you've got different groups provided with weapons by the international community, it's just an international mess, but in the beginning it wasn't like that.
Thank you very much, Judy. That was really